Thank you very much. My name is Michael King. I'm an artist on the west coast of Canada, near Vancouver, BC. So excuse my accent. I'm an oil painter. I love plein air painting, and I'm also the Winsor Newton demo artist for their artist's oil line of products. And we're going to be doing a paint along today with a landscape that I took up a mountain close to the Rockies here in beautiful BC. And I just want to talk about this way a little bit about my socials on Instagram. If you're there, my tag is michaelking.ca. If you happen to finish this piece, please tag me. I'd love to see it. I'm on YouTube as well, Michael King Art. My website is michaelking.ca. CA refers to Canada, of course. And I also have a artist interview podcast at artfulminds.ca. If you go onto YouTube as well, you can just Google Artful Minds podcast. And I have interviews with artists from around the world, many of which you've probably heard about or heard from. Now, this is some of my work, and you can see I lean towards more of an abstract style of landscape painting. I find it a little more expressive, a little more interesting in a sense, more impactful. And that's how we're going to be painting today. And that's why I think we can get everything done in an hour and a half because it's just a lot of big shapes with a little bit of nuances here and there. I would like to take 5 seconds of your time to let you know about my online education at michaelking.ca under instructions. You can find that I have monthly group critiques and I have a follow at your own pace, a masterclass called Painting More Loosely. Now we get into the whole Winsor Newton aspect of it all. And these are the four paints plus white we're going to be using. This is a great limited palette, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in depth in a second here. But on the left, we have our Winsor Yellow, which is a PY74. These numbers that I'm talking about can be found on the back of the labels. We'll get into that in a little bit second and why it's so important. We have a Permanent Rose, which is a PV19. Cobalt Blue, PB28, or Burnt Sienna, which is a PR101 and titanium white, which is PW6, and it's a highly opaque white. And I just want to caveat back over to the burnt sienna. Usually a burnt sienna is a PBR 7, I believe, which is more opaque, fully opaque, cooler brown. Winsor Newton have decided to go into the more of the PR 101, which is a iron oxide, and it's fully transparent, and it gives you a real richness to the burnt sienna that you don't get with the other standard burnt sienna. Now, I do want to take a little short trip down the lane of labels. I know this might sound boring, but there's really only three things that are highly important on labels. And in the center there, you can see something called permanence. And that refers to how permanent this pigment is in terms of light fasteners, along with the binder integration, whether it's linseed oil or safflower oil. And in a standard environment, say like your house, how well does this hold up? And the higher the permanence, the better, of course. The series number is always important to look at because the higher the series number, the more you can expect to pay. So a series one, like a titanium white, is a lot less expensive than say a series four, which I believe is the cobalt blue. And up on the top right, this is usually on the back of the tubes. You can see the number there. It refers to the pigment number, the identification number. So this instance, it's PB35 for cerulean blue. The P just stands for pigment. The B stands for blue. If it was a PR, it'd be pigment red. So it tells you the family it's in. And then the 35 in this instance just happened to be the number that was available when they entered it into the system. And why these are so important is sometimes you can go to you're always using the cerulean blue, and you go to another brand and they just have cerulean blue on it, but you turn it over and it might be a mixture of phthalo and white instead of being true cerulean. So this way you can always make sure you get what you get. Majority of the time. There's caveats to that, but let's stick with that. And last but not least, light fastness. Light fastness. And of course, this is really important because you don't want your painting fading. And the higher the light fastness, the better, of course. So always some good things to look out for sure. And what will we be working on? And so this is the view, the top left image is the view from the top of this mountain. And I decided to crop it in to something a little more interesting instead of having all the sky and a little bit of water in the bottom left. And then on the bottom right is the initial plein air piece I did for the um, at on location, sorry. And then the upper right was another quick study I did in the studio, putting in less sky, seeing how I can adjust the values accordingly to bring me where I want the viewer to go. And this is kind of the process we'll be taking through today. And I'm going to take it to my palette just to talk about the colors. I have them all laid out here, up to the top, right to left, the Winsor yellow, the permanent rose, the cobalt blue, the burnt sienna, and the titanium white. Let me just move those. And I'll be using these artisan oil synthetic hogs. And I'm always dubious when I see synthetic hog or something referring to something that's natural and they make it synthetic. And I have to tell you, I was pleasantly surprised. I've beat these brushes up quite well many times, and they're still holding their shape. They got really good edges still, and they hold a lot of paint, much like a hog, and you get the scritchy, scratchy feeling, the same as hog. So highly recommended. And of course, we have our palette knife. This instance, this one happens to be the squared version. And I will be painting on, excuse the backward nature of it, but it's the oil and acrylic canvas textured paper pad by Winsor Newton. I really enjoy this for studies. You can just put it up, do a quick study, put it down, let it dry. The paper helps the oils in a sense cure faster because they absorb the oil. You get a more matte finish, but great for studies and you can lay everything flat. Let me just move this. I got some paint on it, so I'm gonna have to be careful. And why did we pick these pigments? Because they will provide good secondary mixes. Good enough for what we want, of course. Of course, we have the Winsor yellow. And what I want to mention is that all pigments do have a bias. And by that, I mean there is no pure yellow, no pure blue or anything like that. In this instance, the Winsor yellow, it's more of a neutral yellow than most, but it does lean more towards the orange. But I find it still makes really good green. So if we mix this with our cobalt blue, we get a very nice green coming through. Of course, the more yellow you add, the little more summery green it is, right? And then we have our permanent rose and our cobalt blue. This will make a decent enough violet. It gets really dark, which is the intention. But if I add some white in here, you can sort of see the violets coming through. And of course, if you want, you can lean it towards red. Although this cobalt blue leans more towards green to make better greens, it produces a not bad violet, and that's probably primarily because the permanent rose leans a lot to the violet. If we were to mix the permanent rose with an ultramarine blue, we'd have an even a more intense violet. And that's why knowing the pigments are so important if you're looking for that really saturated violet, not as saturated as a dioxazine violet, but something more saturated. I do have ultramarine on my palette here, so I might as well take some of that and show you. And some of the permanent rose. You can see already how much more vibrant that is. Oops, a little more white. Our permanent rose. And might not be visible on the screen too much. It's close, but there's more saturation here with the ultramarine blue than there is with the cobalt. And of course, good old standby burnt sienna, beautiful color, even like that, mixed with white, still a beautiful color. Makes good oranges with the yellows as well if we were to start mixing in some yellows. Not the bright, vibrant boat buoy yellows, I mean oranges, but still a nice orange if we need it. But what I really like about burnt sienna and cobalt blue is they can make kind of your ad hoc blacks. So here we have a nice black, and we'll break this into two piles. We'll add a bit of white into each, mix that up, and it's kind of a neutral gray because we have nothing to compare it to. But if we wanted to, we can easily make this gray a little more cool or blue, or this gray over here a little more warm with the burnt sienna. And that's why I really like having these two pigments on my palettes because I can really make good blacks, but I can shift them warm and cool. All right. If you have any questions, throw them in the chat and they'll get passed on to me. Now I am going to start the painting, but give me about 30 seconds. I just have to adjust a couple things in my studio. Perfect time for a question if anything shows up.
Sean is asking what you mixed up to get the black color.
I mixed up the cobalt blue and the burnt sienna. And then from there, you can make it a little more cool, or you can make it a little more warm, depending on which is each pigment you add to it. There we go. I think we're good. All right. So here I have a little bit of palette paper just mounted next to my canvas just for ease of convenience so you can see how I'm mixing. On the side here, I do have some sans odor to mix in the mineral spirits to make it a little more thin. Saying that though, I'm not using a medium. You could use a medium. Of course, if you wanted to dry faster, there's always a liquid. Liquid Original is a really good one for making paints dry faster. If you don't like how liquid loosens the paint, you can always add the liquid impasto, which squirts out much like paint. So it's like adding a medium that'll help loosen your pigment, not necessarily thin it, right? There's a huge difference. So. And one quick tip that I like to do on any type of paper, whether we're painting on watercolor paper or this happens to be the Winsor Newton oil and cam or oil and acrylic paper, is kind of prime it up with a little bit of the mineral spirits. So it's a little bit easier to add the paint on. And you can do this with the acrylic gesso canvases or canvas in general. It will help adding oil onto the acrylic surface a little bit better. You don't have to add a lot, just enough to kind of get it in there, and this will just help with the painting process. And if you think you put too much on, of course, you can just wipe some off with a paper towel. No biggie. Now, I will bring up the reference photo quickly here just to show you, to remind everybody, this is the reference photo. So this is how we're going to put in the large shapes, and I'm just going to sketch it in with paint. And I'll just take some of the mineral spirits. And, I always have a tendency to use the burnt sienna for sketching. And I'm using the number 10 brush. And we're not going to worry about all the little trees in terms of their leaves and the trunks and stuff like that. It's just going to be the large shapes of like here we have the sandy area. Right, so we have this large shape here. Of course, we have some of these trees that are coming down. We're not going to really worry about all these tree shapes later. We're going to cut those in with the paint after. But we have kind of this shape of that bush in front here. And you can see where painting abstractly can help in that I have my shapes. So in essence, this is quite interesting to me. You have one, two, three, four shapes that really make up this painting, arguably five if you include the trees for the negative space. And this is all we really need. We don't have to worry about putting the tree, like drawing in the trees and everything like this. We just have our basic roadmap right there. And I think the first thing I want to do, and I want to put in the trees, I want to key them in. And instead of just going with the standard green that we kind of see on the screen here, let me bring it up again, right? The good old evergreen green. I want to mix it up and I'm going to force those to be a little more blue. So I'm going to go to my cobalt. I'll add a little bit of yellow so we have maybe a little bit of greenness into them, but then I'll add my little bit of burnt sienna to keep them dark. Maybe a touch of the permanent rose. Although that's warming it up, it's still cool because I have more blue in the mix than I do the permanent rose. And kind of this is how I paint. I just scrub things in because I'm blocking things in more or less. I'm trying to get rid of the white. And you could just say, well, why don't you just can't tone your canvas? I could, but the tone isn't necessarily what I want in my painting, so I always will paint on white. There are instances where I will do it, and that's not blue enough for me. So you could argue about coolness, of course. And once you get this first layer of paint on, it really helps what's laying on the paint as well. So I'm just scrubbing all this in. And don't worry about going overlapping with the other shapes, because if you've drew them in once or drawn them in once, you can draw them in again. And having that non-perfectness to your painting, I think adds to it. It brings out who you are, kind of a style. and a little more blue, and we'll kind of just start with the heavy blue here and let the brush pick up paint as we go and kind of drag it over. But as we come over to the right, I mean to the left, I want to make it a little more sienna. So we're going to make a transition from a blue green to a sienna green. And the way I do that is I'll mix up some green and then I'll throw quite a bit of sienna in it. And if it's not dark enough, I'll throw blue in it. And you think, well, okay, you're adding more blue, so you're making it bluer. Yes, technically, but you can see on the palette here, especially that this mixture is still substantially more sienna-like than it is blue-like. Here, where you're pushing the boundaries, so maybe more sienna. And then I'll just block that in. Big shapes. And you'd be amazed at how much big shapes get lost into the painting after you put in a sense of detail. Like as soon as we start putting in some of these negative spaces for the sky and then some of these trees that poke up under or past this bush, you'll see that this gradation really doesn't matter that much. It matters, but not as much as you think it does, right? And so, I have some brush marks in here. If that bothers you, you can change them or you can use them for your advantage. Go a little bit left leaning here, but as we come up, maybe go a few right leaning, a few straight here and there to create a sense of chaos in these back areas. So what we're doing is we're just saying, hey, these are trees. You'll get a sense of trees, especially when we cut the sky back in. But really what I want is just this gradation from a sienna green to more of a blue green. And you can accentuate it depending on how much you want to. I mean, they say there's no rules in the arts, and I kind of agree with that. I mean, you have to know some of the rules to understand how you can break them. But I mean, we'll just add a little more blue on this side. And already with this paper, this paint's setting up, which is kind of nice compared to a canvas. There we go. This is getting a little bit light for me in the center. So maybe I'll just darken this up a little bit. A little more pressure with the brush. And I come in. And then I'll go more on the sienna side. So basically what I'm doing is creating gradation. And this is why I love oil paints as well, because you can make a gradation forever, in a sense, in terms of time that you have during the day. And we'll darken this up again. We're not bound by constraints of drawing like an acrylic. Now I just want a consistent value here. So yeah, this is better. So now when I squint, there's a little more consistency. There's less value shift in terms of seeing the white of the canvas. A little more there. All right. And so a little history about Winsor Newton. It's quite fascinating because it was started by a chemist and an artist, kind of a strange mix, right? So the chemist's name was William Winsor, and of course the artist was Henry Newton, and they wanted to bring just a better quality art materials out there because back in the day you just ground your own and you made what you did. They wanted to make it a little more accessible. Instead of artists making all their paint, they wanted artists to buy all their paints. And so they did that. And I think they came out with a watercolor set in 1842. They founded Winsor Newton in 1840. So quite a long time ago, right? More than 100 years, obviously. And what I find interesting about all this is I think in 18, what I got to check my date here, sorry. Yeah, in 1842, that's where my date came from. They patented a screw top aluminum tube. And I find this fascinating. I don't know if this is true, because I just made a reference to myself, that they kind of sparked the impressionistic, because that ranged from 1860 to 1880. Now these artists could go out on the field with all the paint with them, and then they could just paint, squeeze it on their palette and use it directly. They don't have to sit there grinding for days. So in a way, I like to say Winsor Newton kind of revolutionized painting. I don't know how accurate it is, but that's my view of it. Now we're going to get into these green bushes slash trees. And this is where I want a little more green coming through. Instead of this darker bluey green, I'm going to get into a lighter, more, what do I want to say, aqua green, I guess. So we're going to mix the cobalt blue with the Winsor yellow. And we need a little bit of lighter value with it. And I always add too much white. It's just the nature of the beast. And there we are. We have a nice kind of aqua blue. But what I want to do is I'm not just going to fill this whole area in. I want to take it from kind of the cooler greenies greeny blue to the warmer greeny blues. So if we go back to my reference photo here, just let me bring it up. You can see from the right to the left, there, especially in the left middle-ish, there's a little bit of light yellow. And that's what I'm kind of using as influence for moving that gradation. So I'll just put this in, starting on the left. And we can just scrub it in. You don't worry about edges too much. It is what it is. We'll adjust it as we go. And so maybe 2/3 of this, we're going to use two-thirds of this color. We'll bring it in. And if you want, now we can get into more of the creating interest. So you can hold your brush and you can start bringing it up into the previous mix that we had there, kind of making it grass-like. Maybe some come down further. Just playing with this, how you feel it should go. And then we're going to move into the more greeny blue or yellowy greeny blue, I guess. A little lighter with the yellow. And this is just the cobalt blue and the Winsor yellow. Winsor yellow is so called because of the Winsor Newton, but the pigment is PY74 and it's technically a Hansa yellow medium by the industry's name. So that's an alternative name for that. And that's why it's important to sometimes know your pigment numbers. A little bit too dark, not yellow enough. Because if let's say you use a Hansa yellow medium all the time and you are out painting in a town or city that you don't really know, but you run out of your Hansa yellow medium and they only stock Winsor Newton products, not other brands, for whatever reason, you can go in there and you can look on the back of the tubes and see, oh, look, you go through all the yellows that they have, and you see this one yellow that says PY74, and you go, oh yeah, okay, that's Hansa yellow medium. I can use that, and I don't have to worry about there being any issues with understanding that color on my palette. And there's other things out there which fascinating. Everyone loves their colors. And a lot of my friends lately have been into King's Blue. They just love this. They rave about it. And I said, okay, give me that tube. I want to have a look. And so I turn it over and it's just a mixture of PB29 and PW6, which is ultramarine blue and titanium white. So here they are spending $35 on this tube when I can just mix it with my Series 1 or Series 2 ultramarine blue and white. It's more of a convenience color. It's not necessarily a kind of a new color. So that it can save you money too. If you find this color that you really love and you see that it's actually made with two pigments on your palette, then you don't really have to spend any money on it, right? I mean, of course, we'd love you to buy all the colors by Winsor and Newton. I think we have 133 now for the old Artist Oil Color series, but sometimes you don't need to. So I'm just kind of making this transition, gradating these two. You can see as we come through. I'm just making dibs and dabs, making it look like a brush. Think like a brush, think like a tree. Don't worry about things not looking right. And I want a better transition in between here now. So instead of just gradating it and potentially making mud, I'm going to be mixing a third hue mix, color mix to kind of blend these together. And all it is just more cobalt blue mixed in with the yellow. I already have some white in there, so I might not have to lighten it, a little more blue, do a test. One thing that's really good about, well, not about oil painting in general, but painting in general is mix and test. Then you can get an idea of what's going on. You don't have to mix. It looks like it's proper. Put it all over your canvas, and then all of a sudden you have a problem because it was the wrong value or something like that. I spend a lot of time mixing and testing. Okay, I like this a little bit better. I got it to where I want. It's more of the same value of this blue green, but more green. And so I'll just put this in as a transition. So instead of blending the two now, I have this whole new color that I mixed to make it interesting. All right, it might be a good time to ask if there's any questions.
Michael, you're using titanium white in this. If you had a flake white or zinc white, what would be some of the expected differences?
Oh, that's a great question. So a zinc white or a flake white, especially they are more semi-opaque, so you'll have stronger tints. So my yellow that I mix with my white produces a pretty good tint, I would say. but you can see it can be referred to as chalky, and you'd have to add more yellow to really get it. There we go, a little more saturation into that. But if, say, this was a zinc white or a lead white, you would get a lot more color saturation from that initial mix because they're more semi-opaque than they are opaque. And so that's the advantage of using something like that. My suggestion as a professional artist, flake white is amazing if you know how to handle it. Precautions everywhere, of course. But for zinc white, always mix in a little bit of titanium white just for better film stability. So that's my opinion on that. But it mixes so much different. Great question. Now for this bottom area where it's the more yellow green, so we could remix into the same pile, but I'm going to do a fresh mix. On my face is in the way of that mixture. Just let me move that. Whoops. I'll put me here for now. I'll erase myself in a moment, but just want you to see this mix. So it's a green, but it's heavily on the yellow side. But we don't want full chromacy in terms of, I don't want to see all this saturation in this paint, right? And so I'm going to probably add a little bit of burnt sienna. And because it's a green, maybe a bit of the permanent rose. We can throw a little more of that in a little bit later. In a specific area, a little more yellow. And I'm going to do a test. And so what I'm looking for, especially in this area here, is just a variation in hue from that green yellow. It's almost the same value of this lighter value, which is fine because we can build on that. You can see on the right, I'll make it a little bit darker, and the left or more central, I'll make it lighter. And I'll probably leave it this value right in this side here. So bring that in. Don't worry about little things like this where this brush stroke mixed with this other paint that was here. We created this kind of vertical. That's the beautiful accents you love to see in painting. We'll just bring this up. You kind of get it in. We can always come back with whatever this mixture was up here to bring more of these dibs and dabs down to make it more like a nature scene. Nature scene is chaotic, very full of variety. It has a lot of variety. So one thing I read one time and it stuck with me is a successful painting is a variety, variety, variety. Variety of brushstrokes, variety of hues, variety of temperature, variety of edges. If you can get a lot of variety in your painting, you will be more successful than if you do something that is less variety. And by that, I mean, like when you do trees, if you were to do those 4 trees like that, that happens in nature, but instead, maybe these 4 trees are kind of bunched together and they're unequal proportions, unequal dimensions. Like maybe this one's really thick, right? This is more interesting in a painting than this would be. And since we're here, I'm going to put in the bottom and we're going to go a little more violet and we're going to do our cobalt blue. Yep. And our permanent rose. Permanent rose is a strong mixer and you get really strong violets. And, we don't really necessarily want that strong of a violet, although it could be interesting if you like strong hues. The only caveat to that is if we put a strong saturated color here, it's going to change the intention of the painting. I'm really all about intention. I want to drive the viewer kind of right here, anywhere in here. But if we have a strong hue down here, it's going to pull me down and I will never get them to where I want them to go. So we're going to neutralize that a bit with the burnt sienna, maybe a bit of yellow. And then we'll a little more blue. We can kind of get a dirty lavender out of that, I guess you could say. It's a gray violet. So I'll just wipe this off here. I think it might be a good time to just, whoops, pull it back. There we go. And I don't mind it being this dark because we can always lighten it later.
While you're filling that in, Michael, we did have a couple comments and some questions coming in. Um, so Heather, we have an art historian in our midst. She commented about the paint tubes. She said, "You're right about the paint tubes being revolutionary, by the way. I'm an art historian and certain technologies like paint tubes and synthetic pigments were super important for plein air painting." and that prior to paint tubes, artists used pig bladders, which only lasted about a day for moving color from place to place.
That's interesting. So my guess was right. That's great. I forgot about the
Yeah,
synthetic colors too. They changed Impressionism as well for sure.
yeah, super cool. That's great to know. Um, Elizabeth is asking, and you may have touched on this, if I don't have Winsor yellow, is there a substitute? She's trying cad yellow light.
Okay, yeah, cad yellow light will work. It'll mix differently. You'll get stronger greens with the cobalt. In terms of where cad yellow light falls in relationship to the Winsor yellow, which is a Hansa yellow medium, it is definitely a cooler yellow. So if you were to take some of that cad yellow um, and mix in some of the permanent rose, just a tiny bit, then you'd be coming up towards a bit of the Hansa yellow. So it's just cooler yellow is all, and you just got to keep that in mind. Good question though.
Awesome. And Zanat is asking, how quickly does the paint dry with the liquid?
With the liquid, they say that it will dry 50% faster than the standard oil. That said, though, what does that mean? And so you can say, in some instances, oils can take up to a year to fully cure. We're talking heavy impasto. But for the average artist, it'll be touch dry probably without liquid, right? We're probably talking 2 weeks, depending on what you painted it on and the time of the year. So with the liquid, I've done my own experiments here. I've been able to, with liquid, it's touch dry within 2 days, depending on the thickness. The thicker the paint, the longer it's still before it becomes touch dry. So maybe 5 days before the thicker stuff gets touch dry. But of course, it isn't fully cured. You still got to be careful with it. You can probably still put a dent in it with a fingernail, but at least now you don't have to worry about rubbing your clothes on it or something like that, right? So the liquid will definitely help it dry substantially faster. Now, if you happen to be in a climate that has a lot of heat, a lot of warmth, I've seen plein air painters use it, and their painting is dry kind of by the time they're pretty much done because the sun's just beating down on it. So within an hour and a half session, majority of the painting is dry because they've used liquid, which I find fascinating, right? So I hope that
Wow.
answers your question. It's ambiguous, but it's concrete, I guess, in a sense.
Susie is asking, can you use liquid with other oil paints?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, everything in Winton's line or Winsor Newton's line is fully compatible with all the other oil paints out there by any other brands. There's no need to worry about cross-contamination or one influencing the other.
Great.
Those are great questions, everyone. Thank you. So what I've done now here is I've added a little bit of dark here, kind of just to mimic a shadow coming from this lighter plane. Now what I want to do is I want to create a push up to my focal point, which I'm aiming to be here. And so instead of leaving this little flat, I'm going to add some darks here, grade it this way, and you'll see instantly how my eye will start coming up this way. So I'll just use more cobalt blue, keep with the permanent rose. I want a rosy feel, but not too chromatic. That's a bit chromatic to me in terms of the blue that comes out of that. So I add some burnt sienna, and I think I might have it. Yeah, not bad. So I got to mix more paint. I have a bad habit of not mixing enough paint. So let me get that. No, too much red. Look at that. So we got to compensate. So now I go into a fury of trying to fix things. It even happens to the best of us. There we go. There we go. And so get that paint, and what I'll do now is I'll just create a gradation up. And there we go. And you can change the gradient. Whoops, I got a bit of yellow in there. You can keep it more flat in areas you could possibly make it more vertical, right? In a sense of variation, add a little dib and dab here and there. Keep that shadow present. And then you can see it's a little bit lighter here, driving me through. So instead of darkening this even further and risking having a painting that might be too dark, I'm going to lighten this value here for that violet a little bit to help complete the transition. And you'll be amazed at how important gradations are in paintings. It's something I've never taught. And I'm annoyed by that because it changed the way I painted. You can guide someone through a painting so easily with gradations that it's ridiculous how well it works. So find some of your favorite paintings you find on Instagram or something you have in your house or even something you see in a museum, and then say to yourself, well, how's the artist controlling me? And think about gradations. And then you'll probably look at this painting entirely different, because it'll surprise you how um, how well they use gradations. Gonna mix a little cooler violet, doing a test. Yeah, I like that. So I'm just gonna kind of just lay this in here. And the edges make it look a little bit harsh, so I'm gonna just soften that edge a little bit. Right, don't bring up this light all the way up because you're gonna decrease the illusion of that gradation of pushing you up and maybe make it a little bit more powerful here. Maybe make it a little bit lighter there. Maybe we can add a bit of yellow. It'll gray out the violet a little bit, but it also makes it warmer. So let's try putting this in here, kind of just in there. So this is my third step. So this pushes you through to here, which is close to my focal point, but I want to bring you to that focal point. But before we jump into that, because it'll be so obvious how well this works, let's do some of these trees up here and paint the negative space. And if we look back at the reference photo, um, really when I cropped it, I have a lot of white space, focusing more on the left than I do on the right. My original plein air had a lot of the top filled in with the white, and I like how it concentrated on the left there a little bit better. I'm going to take my palette knife, and I haven't really talked about the palette knife that much, and I'll do a little demo right now about it. It's great for mixing paints, of course, great for scraping your palette, but what else do you use a palette knife for? For example, if you find your brush strokes are too harsh in an area, this happens to be one of those more square ones, but any palette knife will do. You can put it down and then you can just kind of wiggle it. And what this does, it starts creating an instantly soft edge. It creates these scritches and scratches you can't get with a brush. So again, it adds that variety to it, right? If you want, you can actually scrape with it. So we can get a lighter value instead of painting that lighter value. And again, this is why I like painting on white, especially with oil paint, because the oil paint will tend to stain whatever's underneath it. So we'll get a more saturated light yellow like this than we would if we were trying to mix it with titanium white. And of course, just in general, if you want, you can do scratches and scratches. Get the sense of grass, the sense of detail without there being any detail. And this stuff really you won't see from 6 to 8 feet standing back. These little gems here are for when you come up and you go, oh my God, look at that. He scratched all those grasses and that's real cool. But you want the impact from 6 to 8 feet so you can draw people in before they see that, right? Anyway, let's get into the sky. And the sky is like a light violet, so I'm going to take a lot of white. I'm just going to go into my blue and my permanent rose, cobalt blue, permanent rose. And now's your opportunity. You can go a little more red with this. You can go a little more blue with this. I don't know if you've experienced any of the smoky haze that come with the fires that we've all been having lately. But as terrible as it is, those days are amazing to go out and paint it if you have a mask, because the light is so rich and orange. It transforms the landscape. It's phenomenal. And we'll just do a little test up here. I think that's a little bit too light. On a value scale that is really light. So I'm going to bring it into a little more manageable range. And I don't want it, personally, I don't want it vibrant, right? So I will kill the violets with maybe a little bit of yellow. And by killing it, I mean reducing the saturation, reducing the chrome of the mix that I had. And we'll do another test next to the one we originally had. And it's darker, but I still think we can go a little bit darker with it. So although I think it's right, I need to go a little darker with it. And this is the beauty of being able to test on your canvas. You can instantly see the value difference between them all. I think I'm gonna go one step darker. I do a lot of this. I spent most of my time painting, I think, is mixing paints, getting the right value, the right nuance that I want. And then of course, when we get it on there, we can always change it up. But so you want a good amount of paint on this because we're going over a previous amount of paint. The beauty of paper is though, this is set pretty much. It's not dry, of course, but it's set enough to paint on. If you're working on an acrylic primed or universal prime canvas or something like that, the paint might be, the under paint might be a little more slippery, so you need more paint to put it on. And I'll give you a pro tip for painting thicker paint onto paint on a canvas. Instead of doing the standard brush strokes where we're more perpendicular to the canvas or slightly angled, the more parallel you are with your substrate, your canvas or your paper, the easier the pigment on the brush comes off, and that's how you can paint thicker and thicker a lot easier. The more it's more vertical, the more paint it'll start taking off if you start working on thicker paint. So something to think about. And with
Michael,
this, oh yes,
just want to give you a heads up. We're a little over halfway. Just giving you a
okay,
quick time check. It's 1:50.
okay, thank you. So we'll start putting this in and think like a tree. All right, maybe there's a bit over here. This comes over narrower. We got the thinner tops. This comes down. This one comes a little bit farther down. We got some dibs and dabs in there, and then this comes over here. So we're thinking more negative than we are positive. You know, in some instances, I'm looking for the positive as a paint negative. And this is an instance of variety. So with this one, I don't necessarily want to bring it in line with this one. It would create a little bit too much static energy or feeling. So I'm going to leave it above. And then maybe I'm going to make this gap the biggest. And we'll start doing something like that. This one comes down quite a bit. And then maybe we have a little bit over here. So you can start to see the trees emerge a bit. I'm going to bring this over a little bit more. Right? There could be a dab in the middle of nowhere. There we are. Now we can have fun with this too. We want to use this section of the sky we just brought in and gradate you down. So we'll force it by adding a little more blue to darken it up a little bit. And at the top part only, maybe we'll just keep that dark. So now I'm just gradating these smaller shapes. That isn't, we gotta get a little darker on that. A little too chromatic there for me, so adding a bit of yellow to neutralize the violets. And so now that the top is a little bit darker, much like a natural sky, and the bottom becomes a little more lighter. And if we want to enforce that even more, we can add some titanium white to that previous mixture we had. Maybe a bit of yellow. I'm starting to lose my voice here. And as we come down, maybe in here, this starts to become a lot lighter, right? So, but only in this section here. We want to draw you down. I think that's good for now, but it's missing something. It's missing, I don't know, some say je ne sais quoi. And so I think I'm going to enforce the saturation of sienna in this area here, kind of like this light is spilling over and glowing in this area, which will also help reinforce our focal point when we get to it. So I'm just going to use not much white and our sienna. And what I love about Winsor Newton's burnt sienna is it's transparent, so it provides such a beautiful mix when you mix it with white. We will kill it a little bit with some cobalt blue, which will help reduce that saturation. It'll also reduce the value, but that's okay. We got to do a test with it first anyway. So I'm kind of thinking in this tree here, yeah, let's add a little bit more blue. Everything's so nuanced. We don't want everything to kick you in the face. That's a little bit better. See how that's less obtrusive? We can make this tree a little bit more sienna in here, but not the whole tree. We're just focusing on the down below area here. Maybe it spills over a little bit into here. And as we come lower, we'll add a little bit of white, a little more burnt sienna. And then as we come lower, so it's a little bit stronger, we can bring this in. And now what's so fascinating about this is you come here and you come down. We're going to darken this probably a little bit and push you in stronger. But really, right now, everything is designed to bring you here. And we can accentuate that even more by putting in our lighter value here for the grass. So let me just scrape some off. And again, if you want to make some of this interesting in here, use your palette knife to scrape. If you want to add a branch somewhere, right, you can start scraping in the trunks here and there. Be careful, don't scrape too hard because you don't want to take away from. And that adds a nice little glow, but you get a sense of kind of the tree trunks coming through. Even scraping the sky a little bit changes the edges a little bit. So something to play with, definitely. I'm not a palette knife painter per se. I'm more of a brush painter, but I use a palette knife to create interest. So we'll get the yellow and the blue, the Winsor yellow and the cobalt blue to make my stronger grassy green. And we have this, so we'll do a test. So we'll bring it right there. And you can see so well how that kind of starts bringing me up. I know that edge can be a bit hard, so I'll soften that a little bit. But it doesn't punch us hard enough. I like extreme tension. Everyone's different, of course. I like obvious things more than nuanced. Well, I'm torn. But when it comes to where I want to direct you in a painting, I definitely want a strong area of interest. Because you want to be able to walk up to a painting. So if you're in a gallery space with you're showing with your local art group or something like that, and you'll notice as people walk around, they'll walk up to some paintings, but they don't necessarily walk up to others. And then notice that and do the same yourself as you walk past a certain painting. Kind of think about, well, what draws me into that painting that I want to walk up to close to it. And chances are they have something like this. They have a nuanced section where they're really pushing the contrast, a focal point per se, right? I started bringing too much of this over top of this green that we originally had, so I'm going to start to remix that. So painting, I read, and I really, this is a quote that sticks with me. Unfortunately, I cannot remember who to give credit it to. Painting is nothing more than a series of corrections. There are people out there that start from the top left or from an eyeball and they expand out and they never touch everything again. But for 99% of us, we have to just paint and go in there and fix things and change things. So if you think of painting as nothing more than a series of corrections, it makes things so much easier because we know we can go on later on to fix something. So I just want to adjust this area here. There we go, a little more light in this section, right? A little more, I need a little more push from this area here. So I'm going to darken this position on the right-hand side of the mid bushes. And I'm just going to do that with that same mixture, but with a little bit darker. I mean, it would be interesting to have that same mixture, a little more sienna. I don't know. It's an interesting call. There's so many ways you could paint this painting. I could probably paint it, you know, a dozen different times with different ideas. There we go, kind of like that. So a little bit darker here. Let's push that darkness a little bit more. Little dibs and dabs that help. There we are. So a little bit darker. I can feel a stronger push. There we are. I want to bring some of these trees up or these bushes up here. Looks very bush-like.
Michael,
Sorry,
I
was
have a
it?
question here. We're asking if in between, are you doing any cleanup of your brush, wiping it off or using any of the thinner?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, majority of the time I'll just wipe it off with on my paper towel, but sometimes when I'm transitioning, I have a big tub of odorless mineral spirits And I use that to swish my brush into. Yes. Good, great question. Majority of the time, though, I can get away with just wiping it. Though. And last but not least, I think this whole area of static color here needs to be nuanced. So this little L shaped of grasses, I think we got to create that gradation in again, for lack of a better word, and we'll just remix whatever's there. And close enough is good enough because they're variety. We just don't, we want to make sure that our value is correct. So let's do that. So that's dark, which I kind of like. It's darker than what I have there, but it's lighter than this value here, so I still get a sense of a ground plane, which we want. There we go. And we'll just put this in and, you know, brush it in, bring it up, however you want to do, whatever your style is with your brush, do it. Kind of bring it in. Maybe there's a little bit darker down here where it meets the kind of got the gravel that we have down there. Maybe some of this extends beyond a little bit. Play with it. React to it. I know that's hard for some, especially if you're a beginner. All right, I like how this pushes me in, but I think this side on the right needs to be a little bit more strong in terms of the value being darker. We got to be careful. We just can't be the same value as that bush. Although it would be interesting to try it. I mean, just because I say it shouldn't doesn't mean you couldn't, and you have an entirely different painting, right? There we go. So now we have this strong push coming over here. And you know what? Let's go for broke and kind of make it darker. And that's the thing, you don't know until you try it. So let's do it. Yeah, I like that. Actually, 1, 2, 3, 4 steps. And let's put a little more saturation into here. I feel it needs to be a little more saturated, but darker. So this would be a fun one. So we're going to take our yellow into that initial green. And you might say to yourself, well, how do you make yellow more saturated but darker? Let's start with the burnt sienna, or we can go into the permanent rose. We haven't touched that much. And so it creates that ochre quality to it, a little more saturation than kind of the muted green we have there. And I'll do a test. I think that's a bit too much, so we're going to darken it up a bit by using our cobalt blue, because that's kind of our darkest. A little bit of sienna. And painting with limited palettes like this can be so great because you only have so many choices, right? If you want to darken your green, well, you're kind of stuck with using your blue or your sienna, right? So a little more chroma, but I'm going to lighten it up a bit more. There we are. Some dibs and dabs here and there. Kind of make them strategic. And what I love about these brushes is they have a nice pointy point to the end. Most brushes do, but what you can do some scratchy scratchies. And what this does, it not only breaks up this edge differently from a brush, but it adds that sensitive idea of grasses. And so when you come up to this painting, you think, oh my God, look at the detail in there. But you know, there's no detail whatsoever. It's quite fascinating. Just be careful. If I go really hard here, right? If I step back, that's probably too much in terms of how much I scratched. So I might do it lighter just to get the sense that there's something there. And knowing that, you know, maybe here then I can really scratch that. And then we're going to adjust that focal point light on the grasses again. Kind of brighter. There we go. Nice. And so really now you can see how everything is pushing. And one of the tricks I like to use now, I know I stand back my 6 to 8 feet. Hopefully you can still hear me. And I look at my focal point and I see what's distracting me. And I can see kind of the sky always wants to pull me up. I want to experiment and explore this painting. But unfortunately the sky, I think, ended up being a bit too light. And since painting is nothing more than a series of corrections, all we have to do now is adjust that sky to a darker value. So we're going to mix up our permanent rose and our ultramarine blue, little bit of yellow to reduce the saturation of the chroma of that mix. Oops, that's definitely too much permanent rose. Permanent rose is a beautiful color. It's really strong. It's a PV19. Notice I said PV and not PR. So permanent rose is a pigment violet 19. So even though it might be indicated or feel like it's a red through its name, rose, it is actually a violet pigment. That's why it makes such beautiful violets. So the more you know. All right, so I'm just going to darken up this sky at the top, and we'll kind of just slowly blend it down with a few strokes. I'm not looking for a perfect gradation. I'm just looking for a quick reduction of value in the same kind of nuance that we had. Hopefully I'm not painting too fast for everyone. I mean, we have basic shapes, and if you don't get caught up, we can just scratch and scratch this in, and you should get it painting pretty quickly. And I think I'm gonna go a little darker. Just try that transition of blue. I don't know, might be too blue. We'll see. Use the brush doesn't have to be used the flat all the time. I like using the corners a lot. So you can bring it down that way, and that changes the way that edge is. And then we can make, the trees feel like more tree-like. I can bring it down lightly into this area here. Maybe there's a little bit poking through there. There we are. And I like that better. Well, now when I look at my focal point from a distance, I don't jump up as hard. I seem to travel a little bit more. And I think we can get away with scratching some lighter lights into here, getting the influence of the sky through the trees. And you might say, okay, well, I'm oil painting today with you because I want to try out Winsor Newton oils. But what about when I move to my Liquitex acrylics and this is dry? I don't have the chance to scratchy scratch it to the white canvas, or this is a dried oil paint and I want to go back in later. Well, you can just remix that value that you used because you used a limited palette. It's fairly easy to remember what we had there. We'll do a test, a little bit dark. And it creates using limited palettes are really nice because they help create a mixing memory as well. And yeah, okay, so this, instead of mixing the value, I got a little bit lighter, which is great. And then you can put some nuanced of lights right there, influenced by the sky kind of thing. It adds another dimension, right? Maybe there's something down here as well. Okay. And maybe we find this down here a little too boring, so we want to add some interest to it. Well, why don't we mix a dark with cobalt blue and the burnt sienna. Doesn't necessarily have to be a violet like we have down here. Excuse me. And we want to put some rocks in here somewhere. So we'll put some dibs and dabs of rocks. Not too many, right? We got to be strategic about it too. We don't want to look contrived. There we are. And maybe we want to mix in a cooler, well, we have a cooler aspect of it as well, but the greens and the violet vibrate better than greens and red as far as I'm concerned. So why don't we put some greenery down here as well? If you want to make a forest scene with a lot of green, like vibrate and punch, find a way to bring in violet. It will amaze you how much that scene changes. Violet and greens has to be the best hidden combination ever, in my opinion. That's a little bit too blue. We will try to mix more of the green. Yeah. Maybe there's a bit of grass in here like this. Comes all the way down. And what we're doing, we're not looking for anything specific. We're just looking for something that adds a little more interest to the area, not necessarily fill it up with more green, you know what I mean? There we are. So variety, variety, variety. I have this large shape that has an area of X. I don't want to put in as much green as the violet because that'll take away from the violet. So I put in substantially less green in the violet area and it creates a little more interest. And I think we're pretty much there. What's the time? How are we doing for the time right now?
We are just at the mark of it's 2:08, so we have about 20 minutes total left.
Okay, perfect, perfect. So while I make these final changes, let's talk about the oil paints themselves because in the artist oil line we have 133 colors. And it's quite a lot of beautiful colors beyond just the standard ones. Especially if you're willing to get into the series 4 and 5 or cobalt teals. Oh my God, cobalt teals. It seems expensive. I mean, it's an expensive tube of paint because I think it's series 5, but it's well worth it because there's nothing else that mixed like it. Even phthalos. You can make a beautiful turquoise with a phthalo or a teal, but there's nothing like a cobalt teal. I'm not trying to sell you on it, but I'm just talking about other colors, right? In the Winton line, we have 55 colors, and the artisan, oh yeah, the artisan water soluble oils, there are, sorry, 40 colors. But what I want to say about Winton, I know we're talking about the artist oil quality colors here, but the Winton colors, you know what? So usually a lot of people refer to them as student grade. They're just a less expensive grade. They would have a little more transparent pigment in them, a little less full pigmentation. But that's usually more referring to the higher end expensive pigments. Like you probably won't find a cobalt Winton. It's usually going to be a mixture of some phthalos and whatnot. But what I love about the standard colors you have out there, like the burnt siennas, the ultramarine blues, the permanent alizarin crimson in the Winton line, and the ultramarine blue from the Winton line, I buy the 200 mil tubes because those two colors mix a beautiful violet, and I save a ton of money. So if you're a self-conscious artist like myself, where sometimes you're painting large, you need the economy, you need the scale, right? For plein air stuff, I usually will always buy the artist oil colors because they come in the small tubes. But for my studio stuff, I love the ultramarine blue and I love the permanent alizarin crimson in Winton, the PR 177. It's a beautiful color. So don't limit yourself to just artist quality colors. You'll hear that a lot of instructors say buy the single pigments, buy the artist quality colors. But you know what? You can buy the Winton and still have beautiful paintings. It's all about how you mix with them, right? Because a lot of people also talk about hues and how bad they can be, but they're not. They're just an alternative form of that color. And once you know how you mix them, you're ahead of the game. Not only do you save money, but then you already have a mixing memory of those. All right. So while I was talking about that, I was just mixing the sienna. Sorry, was there another question come through?
Yeah, actually, what about the alkyd colors? Do you
Oh
ever
yeah, alka.
find?
I haven't had an opportunity to use the alka colors by Winsor Newton. Do we make
Mm,
an alka color? Pardon me.
yeah,
Okay. Uh, I can
yeah,
say
there is
though,
one.
okay, the alkyd colors for sure. Experiment with them; they will naturally dry faster because they have the alkyd in them already. So they'll still last within the tubes because it's airtight. The only way oil paint dries is through oxidation with oxygen, and that applies especially as well to alkyds. As long as they're sealed in the tube, they'll last for a long time. As soon as you put them onto your palette and start mixing them, they will cure faster than your standard oil paint. And they're a great way to paint outdoors, especially if you're traveling because by the time you get to, say you're traveling for a week, by the time you get home, some of those paintings will be already dry. So it's a great alternative to just standard oil paints without a doubt. And that tells me I have to increase my knowledge. Thank you for that. And I'm just mixing up this beautiful burnt sienna and white into my previous pile. And what I do this a lot. I don't know if I think you can see it on screen. No, let's move my face away here. Perfect. Is I like to what I call butter. So I'll just do this with the paint, get it off my brush. But then what I do is I take my brush, push it down, and I push it through the paint. And it might be hard to see. Yeah, definitely hard to see. But what it does is it creates a bead of paint on your brush. And so now with that bead of paint, you know where it is. And so now you can better control where that is. And it comes in and it's easier to put that bead of paint on. But what I'll do, of course, is I'll feather some of this. And to feathering it, you don't always have to just brush away. You can push in to feather. So many ways you can make brush marks, and that is what defines you from another artist. Let's keep that scratchy scratch in there. Is the way you decide to handle the brush will definitely influence your style. And that just comes with putting in the time and practice, practice, practice. we can do a little adjustments. A little stronger scratches. Right. There's a disconnect with the brightness here and the green and the sienna. So what I want to do is make a transition in that green. And you know, this whole painting, I've been using this 10, and then I switched for the finer details to an 8. So that's the wonderful thing about sort of more capturing the expression of a landscape is you don't have to worry about pulling out the fine details as much. So that's exact same match as I had before. So I'm going to lighten it. And I think I got to keep it a little bit warmer. Maybe a little bit of rose in there to mix up the green to make it more of a reddy green. Right. We'll see what that does. Butter, push. And in this area here, I'll do a test first. See, that's a bit light. I think it's too light in comparison to the light we have on the ground plane. And so this is where I get a little bit nitty picky. We have to not warm enough. So I got to add a little more yellow. And so if you were working with that cadmium yellow light or cadmium yellow lemon, chances are you would always have a really cool green. So you would have to mix some of the permanent rose in there with it. I find the Winsor yellow, beautiful yellow to work with. It's kind of the only yellow I have on my palette next to a yellow ochre. There we go. So a little bit harsh, so I'm going to blend that down. And then maybe we can put some dibs and dabs within that just to change up the shape a little bit. Push this up. I don't know, see. And when I stand back, yeah, I like it, but I think that little green did I did was a poor choice. So I'm going to just change it back to where I had it. And add those scratches again. And we could soften stuff. Even after the fact, that's why I love oils. You can come back with the paper. It's so nice because it's actually set up and tacked quite a bit. I don't have really a chance of damaging much. I can just kind of make things softer. And of course, I can get in there and scratch it. If I scratch it too much, I can come in here and soften it. And everything about this painting now. Let's get the brushes still here. Maybe we'll make some interesting scratches here. Way this yellow transitions, maybe we can scratch that. So in terms of painting, outside of kind of the whole conversation about Winsor Newton paints, is so what I've done is I've taken a painting and I've designed it from specifically just a photo, which is here. I've designed it now that I give the viewer no choice to look where I want them. And believe it or not, you can change this focal point in a different painting or even in this one painting, say you don't like your choice, you can start subduing all this, taking this away and bring the focal point to the right, or you could bring it to something down here. You are in control of where you want the viewer to look through the idea of gradating not only just values, but hues, color temperatures, right? And I'm pushing you into this one area, whereas I can change it all up and easily push you to this area. And one last thing I think is fun, we'll try it, is I'm going to try to warm up this sky a little bit. Just so I can make an understanding of why this is so warm. You know, in hindsight, potentially it might look like it's on fire, but let's see here. And this is a caveat, we're not using this color, but Viridian is a beautiful color to work with in lower skies. You know how skies gradate from a ultramarine blue to a cobalt, and then they get to a warmer blue, light warmer blue at the base. If you were to use Viridian and white in the lower sections of a sky, you will be amazed at how well that looks compared to just lightening a cobalt blue and adding a little bit of yellow into it. It's amazing, but we can get close. I mean, this is like a light Viridian here, right? Let's see, Put a little bit of flavor there. And what it does is not only are we gradating all of a sudden temperature, not so much value, well, a little bit of value from the top, right? But we've warmed this up. It changes, so we're gradating from value, hue, but also temperature. So we're gradating those three things, and it makes it a lot more interesting than if we were to just gradate a blue to a white, for example. Yeah. And sometimes people like thick paint. So let's mix up some thick paint. I'm quite a thin painter. It's just how I've evolved. Some people, well, not some people, other people always say, use thicker paint. I was like, well, sorry, but it's not me. I will use thicker paint and on larger painting, but generally my small stuff isn't really that thick. It's a different intent. So I'm going to mix up some thicker paint, push my brush through. I'll remove this reference image. And, instead of using the brush, let's use the palette knife. And I bring it up so there's a bead of paint right on the edge of the palette knife. And depending on the direction, you get different effects. But let's try this right there. And of course, strong edges. So we'll just wipe the brush and we'll just push into it or pull out of it the effect you want. So just because you put a stroke down onto the canvas, we can even help reduce it. Doesn't necessarily mean you can't adjust it. And chances are you should be adjusting it after. It's a rare instance that you won't adjust something about it. Bring that green up a little bit. There we are. So now you can see we've made this super bright, and really it's so hard not to look at this. Whenever you look somewhere else on the canvas, boom, you'll look straight there. And let's do the fun part. And we'll pull off. I'll put some tape on here. And the trick to putting tape on paper of any kind is I use painter's tape, whatever you do, just lightly touch the edge, don't push it. And you can see we have crispish edges, but I'm not tearing the paper. That said, if you do tear the paper, it's okay. You can always mat it. But remember, it is just a study if you're working on paper generally. So we'll get rid of all the extraneous outside information. And you can really see it now how this painting is just fully designed around this focal point, gradations, hue, temperature, everything like that. Now that concludes the demonstration part of how to paint along with this scene particularly. Now, does anybody have any questions in terms of painting or the Winsor Newton products?
I just have a question as watching you paint the way you choose what you're painting. I'm curious to know like how much you use your reference as a reference or just as inspiration. Like how much do you use it just as inspiration, and then how much do you actually interpret what you want people to see?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. And I would say I use it for inspiration, but then I leave a lot of it alone once I know what I want to do. So even when I'm plein air painting, I know what I want to do. I'll use it as a reference for sketching. But by the time I'm done the sketch and I block in some values, I know where I want to go. So I hardly look up at all. But what I love about plein air painting though is the times you do look up, the light has changed how many minutes, so the lighting is a little bit different. So sometimes you'll see, oh my God, look at that. Like let's say for this scene here, I might have had my focal point maybe over here, but then if I look up 10 minutes later and all of a sudden this light's gleaming through and it's really focusing on that, I have enough time at that point to say, oh, I'm going to change it. So I use it for a lot for inspiration, right? And then same thing from photos. I will use my photos and break them down to shapes. We have the big shape here minus all the negative shapes, kind of like I did when I first started sketching. And so I ended up having one, two, three, four, five shapes for this really complicated scene. And then I use those shapes to the design. And that reference photo gets lost. I don't even look at it after, maybe 15 minutes. It's quite interesting. Yeah. And that's what I love about painting is once you have an idea, you can just go with it and be inspired, right? Fun
Very
tip,
cool.
thank you for the
Hmm.
question, is a toothpick.
Yeah.
If you're painting in oils, you can just easily just scratch your name in. And this is another reason why I like working on white. You can easily just scratch your name in with the toothpick. Hopefully you can see that. It makes it a lot neater, less more modern, contemporary. Any other questions?
I have just another question maybe about the liquid. Do you always coat your surface with liquid before starting, or is there a reason to do it or not to do it?
Yeah, so liquid, I don't use it at the beginning. I was just using straight odorless mineral spirits to prep the
Oh,
paper,
right.
right? And I would suggest probably not to use a liquid at the start because it is a kind of a fat medium. Here's the thing though, if you're going to be doing a painting all in one session, kind of they call it alla prima, so you're going to be painting it and then you're just going to leave it. You're probably not, don't have to worry about that too much, but I don't think using an expensive medium to prime the paper, I'd rather just use the mineral spirits and use the liquid in the paint itself to help it dry. Yeah, yeah.
Cool. I'm gonna give a heads up, everyone. We do like to do a show and tell at the end. So please, if you do come up with some questions, please throw them in the chat. We'll relay them over to Michael while we're doing that. But just want to let you guys know if you want to share in just a minute or two, we'll go ahead and do that. We'll have everyone turn on their cameras who wants to share, and we'll get everybody's work.
Fantastic. I do want to mention also that Winsor Newton recently got their B Corp status, and you might be wondering what B Corp is. And it's just it's not really a status, it's more of a certificate by an independent body saying that Winsor Newton is dedicated to sustainability over profits. So a lot of the effort that Winsor Newton's going to be putting into the B Corp is more sustainable materials, more sustainable processes for their oil paints. Oil paints, it's a little bit harder to be more sustainable because you're really just working with dirt and oil. But where you get that oil from, of course, is important. How you handle the waste oil afterwards. But one of the things they've done, especially in the United States, and I'm missing out because I'm in Canada, they actually have a return recycle program. So you can go on the Winsor Newton site. You can say, I have some old tubes lying around, or old medium bottles that have dried up lying around. You can get them to send, you put all your information in, they'll send you a box, a prepaid box of return. You put all your paints, you put all your bottles in there that are Winsor Newton, of course, not other, and then package it up and you can send it back to them for free and they'll recycle it for you instead of all this stuff ending up just in the landfill. Because we all know our empty
Oh,
tubes, we just toss them in the garbage, but that aluminum and even the plastic can be recycled. So always a great thing to think about. Take advantage of it
yes,
in the
that's
States.
amazing.
I wish we had it here in Canada, right? And so that's
We
part of the
are,
B Corp.
yeah, we are
Sorry,
going
go
to
ahead.
start offering that in store as well,
Oh,
partnering with
really? Oh,
Winsor
that's
Newton
fantastic.
to accept them in store as well.
That's fantastic.
Very
So
cool.
this is the idea of B Corp is putting sustainability and the environment ahead of profits, right?
Love that. I love to hear when companies are going that way. That's great.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Okay, everyone. Anyone who wants to share, go ahead and turn on your cameras.
Ooh, I'm
You
gonna
can
have a look.
change your view to gallery view in your Zoom, and then you can see everyone's screens. And go ahead and share your paintings. I'd love to see what everyone worked on and how each of us interpreted the reference. Anyone? Donna, thank you.
Oh, nice. I like
Min
it. I like those
Chao.
blue greens you got on
Ooh,
the right. Oh, wow.
yeah, like
Machado,
different
nice.
types of depth and interpretation. Chris, thank you.
Absolutely.
Oh, it's great.
And if you guys post these on Instagram, please tag me at michaelking.ca. I'd love to see them. I can share them in my stories. That'd be amazing.
Oh, Anita, very
Nice.
nice.
Love
Well,
these.
I'm glad everyone got as far as they did. I'm always concerned about paint-alongs, just in an hour and a half, right? Well, probably more like an hour. But everyone did really well. That's great.
Yeah. Anita says, I have a hard time with abstract, so I did put details a little. Sometimes we just
Hey,
can't help it.
absolutely. Be yourself. That's who you are as a painter, right? I mean, you have to do what you have to do.
Yeah. That's great. Fabulous. Thank you. Well, it looks like we don't have any other questions. Thank you, Michael, so much for doing this with us today. I enjoyed it. I love the abstract nature of that and learning about the Winsor Newton oils. I hope everyone has a really great day and thank you so much for joining us for our workshop today. And we hope to see you on another one in the future. Thanks and have a great rest of your day, everyone.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
everyone.
Bye.
Cheers.